Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop Stellaris. This is Moondrop's latest IM and their first foray into the 14mm planar IM craze. And to be honest, basically ever since the 7Hz Timeless came out about a year ago, I've been looking forward to this IM, right? There's the 7Hz Timeless and some other IMs came out after that all kind of introduced this 14mm planar driver into the scene and showed that there's a lot of technical performance to be had for not a lot of money. But if I'm honest, like the tuning for all of those other planar drivers has never really been exactly to my preference. And who better to tune that driver to my tuning preference than the company that makes my tuning standard, the Moondrop Blessing 2. Enter the Moondrop Stellaris. So this is coming in at a pretty reasonable price. It's 110 bucks. It's a planar driver IM, and to be honest, I was pretty excited to check this thing out and see, does this live up to my dreams? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? We'll talk about the Moondrop Stellaris. We'll do some comparisons with some other IMs in this price range, and we'll give it a score and all that jazz. Like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're here now live watching, how's it going? Happy Friday evening. If you have any questions about the Stellaris or anything else we talk about, please do leave it in the live chat. At the end of the review, we'll spend some time having good one-on-one time. But for now, we're just going to dive through the review. We'll talk about the build quality, the physical stuff. We'll talk about the sound. Then we'll get into those direct comparisons with some competitors, and then I'll give it a score, and then we'll have a conversation. With that out of the way, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending this in for review. I do have them linked in the description down below if you want to check out the Moondrop Stellaris or anything else they've got. And with that out of the way, let's dive to the table and start talking about the physical stuff first, all right? First of all, first things first, here's the packaging of the Stellaris. I do want to give Moondrop credit for very nice looking packaging. Like even the branding up here I think is pretty handsome. And you know, if you're gonna do waifus in your box, like I think this is a classy one. You know, keeping it classy, Moondrop, I appreciate that. Otherwise, you know, pretty simple, straightforward packaging. Not a lot to spend time on there. But what comes inside the box is, you know, it's 110 bucks, so it's not a ton of accessories, but it's actually kind of pretty good accessories, if I'm honest. So let's put this to the side for a bit. This is a little carry case that comes with the Stellaris. This is a same case that they've included with some other IMs like the Moondrop Blessing 2. No, the Blessing 2 actually came with the worst case. This is my favorite case. Maybe that came with the Kato and some other. But it's basically just kind of like the perfect size. Like it fits roughly in the palm of my hand. It's large enough to hold the IMs, and it's not much larger. So it's just about perfect. It's also got a magnetic clasp, and I'm a sucker for that. In addition to the case, they also include two different sets of ear tips, which I will punch in on here. And these are effectively Moondrop's sort of house tips. These are their MIS foam tips, and they give them to you in both or in all three sizes, large, medium, and small, which is pretty cool. And then these tips are, well, they're not spring tips, and that might be a little bit surprising for you. Frankly, it's a little bit surprising for me, but these are the same. These are tips basically that Moondrop's sister company, Soft Ears, makes. And I've bought these in the past. They're actually surprisingly good tips. They are, of course, silicone, and they're clear as you can see, but maybe what differentiates these from something like the spring tips is that the silicone, just the whole body is a little bit stiffer than the spring tips. The shape of the umbrella of the ear tip is a lot more normal versus the spring tips, where the spring tips tend to be a little bit on the short side. And where these things are similar to the spring tips is they have a really nice grippy silicone. So I actually quite appreciate those ear tips, although I'll be honest, they weren't my favorite ear tips here on the Stellaris, which we'll talk about in a second. Actually, I mean, that's what came inside the box apart from the IM itself. So let's get into talking about the IM with this cable. And this cable is, you would expect me to have a lot of really good things to say about this cable, because it is effectively the same cable that comes on the Moondrop SSR, which is practically speaking my favorite cable on an IM. It does have a slightly different aesthetic. I think you can see that here on the camera, where you've got this blue and gold wound or intertwined underneath the clear silicone sheath. It's a subtle effect, but I think it's actually a really nice looking cable, and has a lot of those same properties, of course, that I like about the SSR cable. It's just got a really nice behavior. It's lightweight, thin and lightweight, which I tend to appreciate with my IMs. It doesn't get tangled, it doesn't kink or anything like that. You can see it rotary wraps quite well. I really love this cable, but, and there is a caveat here, I actually don't know that it's the best match for these earpieces, because these earpieces are a little bit on the heavyweight side. And like I mentioned, this cable is a little bit on the lightweight side. And that combination does tend to, I think also in combination with the relatively long nozzles here on the Stellaris, it does tend to actually get this thing a little bit tangled up here up with the earpieces. It's not so much here. Like again, this cable is really good at resisting getting tangled, but I think because of the heavy weight of these earpieces and the long nozzles, it does end up being a little bit fiddly up top. But I don't know, I'm being mostly nitpicky there. I will say generally I think this is a good match. It's a good cable in general. It's a good match for these IMs. I think aesthetically it looks quite nice too. But that will lead us into talking about the earpieces, and I'll just say up front, let's punch in on those so you can take a look. I really like the look of this. I think this is a great looking IM. It is basically the same kind of paint that you saw on something like the Moondrop Starfield, but you have a much more, I think, tidy design pattern that's painted on top of it. I don't know, there's moon and sun and stars and some other themes, and I don't know exactly what's going on, but I do like it, so it does have that going for it. And you know, it is all painted. I know Moondrop IMs have a bit of a reputation for paint chipping. What I will say is I honestly have not chipped any of mine, and I have used my IMs quite a bit, especially like my SSR and Starfield or Stardust. But yeah, fair warning on that. Apart from that, I mean, I think they look nice, and I mentioned they are a little bit on the heavy side. Maybe even more so than the heaviness, though. It's interesting. I don't know if this is going to come across in the camera, but they do have like a weird clackiness to them. They are an all metal shell. I think I forgot to mention that, but that does contribute to the weight. But they do have like an odd clackiness, which as you're handling them, you'll probably notice it. It's not a bad thing per se. It's just, I don't know. It stands out, so I thought it was worth mentioning. The other thing that's going to stand out about this IM is likely going to be those nozzles. If that's not obvious to you, I would describe this as a very long nozzle. Somewhat of a curious shape overall, to be honest, for an IM. You know, most IMs are not tall like this. Most of them are long front to back. So it's an interesting way to do it, but it is a relatively small cavity inside, especially compared to some of the other planars. It just has a relatively long nozzle. And I was honestly a little bit concerned about what that would mean for the fit. My end decision is honestly the fit's not bad on these. So let me give you a demonstration of what the Stellaris looks like in my ear. There you go. It's got a long nozzle, so it gets in through like the folds of the ear pretty easily and creates a seal in the inner ear canal. Now, what I will say about that is that most of the weight of this IM is resting on my ear canal. I mean, it does, no, that's the wrong way. It does kind of fall backward here and rest on the back of my ear canal, but there's not really much support. You can kind of see as I move this thing around, it's almost like a Nintendo Joy-Con or something like that, where it's pivoting on my ear canal. It's not like an uncomfortable thing because I'm not doing this very often. I'm just kind of using that to demonstrate that like there's not a lot of contact on the inner part of my ear apart from my ear canal. So that ends up supporting quite a bit. But it ends up actually being pretty decent. I will say that the nozzles are on the long side. I would say this is not the best IM for side sleeping if you're into that. This is one of the few IMs where, you know, I sleep in IMs all the time. I have not made it through a night with these things on. And that's just, I don't know, it's not a scientific test, but if I wake up in the morning, they're not in my ears anymore. Usually I've woken up and put them on my nightstand. That's just kind of a sign that it's not the best sleeping IM. So I would say that about the Stellaris, but otherwise, like, I don't know, I don't really have any complaints about the fit apart from the fact that it looks a little weird, right? Maybe I'll pull this back up and give you the side view that, you know, they don't stick out super far, but they also don't snug in really tight into my conches. Overall though, I would say that the physical stuff here on the Stellaris, I think it's not bad. I think it's not bad at all. I think the aesthetic is good, the cable is good, and the earpieces are comfortable enough for me. So there is that stuff. All right, that's the physical stuff out of the way. Let's now rotary wrap this thing back up and start talking about the sound here on the Stellaris. All right, let's get a good angle on you. There we go. There's a good angle. So sound signature. All right, we'll talk about the sound signature, the tuning. We'll talk about what I like and what I don't like before we get into the comparisons. The sound tuning. This is maybe an interesting comparison. You might not have expected to hear me say this, but if you are familiar with something like the Grado SR80, that is an open back headphone that's known for being a very kind of thin, light on bass tune with an extra dose of treble. And frankly, that's exactly what we have here with the Moondrop Stellaris. The set is not at all bassy. If you're looking for a bassy set, I would look at some of the other 14mm planars. Those are all bassy, but that's okay for me, right? I wasn't necessarily looking for a bassy set. In fact, that was kind of what turned me off of those headphones or those other planar IMs. So yeah, the Stellaris is definitely not bassy at all, but I would still say that the sub bass actually extends pretty well in this, which, I don't know, you can see it in a frequency response and it's definitely audible. That is definitely a part where this deviates from that SR80 comparison. But really, the sound tuning on this is quite dominated by the treble. It's just a very bright, it's a very forward, and kind of an open sounding sound signature. So that's the general gist. That sets the template for what we're going to talk about next. And that's talking about, first of all, what do I like about the tuning, or what do I like about the sound here on the Stellaris? So as you might expect from a generally bright tune, this actually gives you a pretty decent sense of imaging, you know, a nice sense of stereo separation between sounds and really distinct placement of them. It's just that bright tuning paints a lively, kind of open sounding head stage that personally I find pretty fun. It's what I would say is probably the outstanding aspect of the sound here. And also, given the fact that it is a pretty bright tune, you might expect the treble to be not just open sounding, but maybe a little bit grating, but it's surprisingly actually pretty smooth. It's not sharp or particularly fatiguing. I didn't have any issues with sibilance here on the Stellaris. And yeah, given the amount of treble that is present here, I was pleasantly surprised that it's not unpleasant treble. And then just apart from, you know, the imaging that we already talked about, I think you get pretty decent technical performance out of this set. You get a really nice sense of micro contrast throughout the top end and especially in the mid-range. Not a lot of detail, I would say, in the bass so much, but in the mid-range is where this stands out in terms of presenting, again, that kind of micro contrast sense of detail to things like vocals or, you know, guitars and stuff like that. So that's the stuff that I like here on the Stellaris. Of course, there are going to be some things I don't like about it. Let's talk about that. And I'll just be honest, I think the tuning on this thing is kind of weird. This is not what I expected. All right, I had the dream that Moondrop was gonna nail the planar tuning. This is not exactly it. It's thin. It's overly thin, which means that the lower mid-range is just quite scooped out. And there's not very much mid-bass body at all, which just overall contributes to a really thin, weightless sound. There's not much body to things like kick drums or bass guitars, and even electronic bass, which a lot of the times can be quite sub-bass focused. Even electronic bass, frankly, is kind of anemic on this set. And then the other thing that's odd about the tonality is that just over forwardness in the treble, which again, I mentioned that it's not so much that it comes across harsh or sharp or anything like that, but it does impact things like the timbre, okay? What I mean by that is you listen to things like hi-hats, cymbals, drum brushes, right? These are like these high frequency percussion sounds that when you hear them on a set that's tuned well, they're gonna have a timbre that sounds like the real thing, right? You're gonna hear the metallic clang, you're gonna hear the weight of them, and you really don't get any of that here with the Stellaris. There's just like a weird kind of splashy weightlessness to that high frequency percussion, just a really dominant sense of like, I don't know if the sound's gonna get picked up, but like that's what cymbals, like it's just like like it's, I don't know. It's not so much unpleasant, but it's definitely not what I'm looking for. We'll put it that way. So those are my general thoughts here on the sound of the Stellaris, but how does that stack up in comparison to some competitors? So I figured I pulled a couple of IMs into play and we'll talk about how these things stack up. So what I've got here on the table, of course, the Moondrop Stellaris, like we just talked about, a 14 millimeter planar driver IM coming in at $110. Here we've got the 7 Hertz Sound Notes Dioko, also a 14 millimeter planar driver IM coming in at $100. And then over here, we've got the venerable Moondrop Aria. This one's been around for a while. I figured a lot of people are probably, if you're Moondrop stands, you probably have this as a reference, or maybe you're even coming from this and looking for an upgrade. So I thought it would be a good thing to bring in here for the comparisons. This one's coming in at $80, and unlike these two, the Aria is a single dynamic driver IM. I think it's a 10 millimeter dynamic. So that sets the stage. Let's talk about how they compare in terms of their tuning, their sound signature. So the Stellaris, like we just got done saying, thin and bright. High frequency percussion sounds off. Vocals have kind of a weightlessness to them, but they are decently textured. The Dioko, in contrast, well, it's actually pretty similar in a lot of ways. I would say it's also thin and bright, but I think the Dioko hits the balance better than the Stellaris. Things sound normal, right? That timbre tonality oddness that I was describing here with the Stellaris, you really don't get that here with the Dioko. Again, it is still thin and light on bass, but it doesn't come at the expense of it sounding weird. And then here with the Moondrop Aria, this is the most different of the three. I would say it's kind of warm actually, especially in comparison to these two, but it's definitely thick in the bass. Not like super bassy set, but it's thick in especially like the upper bass, the mid bass region. But I would say it's still kind of within the range of being a tasteful, mild V-shaped sound signature here on the Aria. So if I were to rank these things in terms of my tonal preference, I would say it's a pretty easy win for the Dioko, and honestly, I'd probably pick the Aria over the Stellaris, just purely in terms of tuning. Like, this is tuning that makes sense. It's a little bit warm and bassy for my tastes, but this is like too far in the opposite direction. Okay. So that's the tuning out of the way. Let's talk about now the technical aspects. Again, both of these are using planar drivers, so they're going to have some similarities. The Stellaris, I would say, has really surprisingly smooth treble, has a nice sense of imaging, but again, you get that sense of just kind of a weightlessness to the sound, and really almost no physicality to the bass. That's the Stellaris. The Dioko, on the other hand, gives you maybe a smidge more body. It's not a ton more. It's still definitely a thin set, but it does give you a smidge more body. I think also the treble feels a little bit sharper and more incisive here in the Dioko, which sometimes can come across as like better defined and even like stronger imaging on the Dioko versus the Stellaris, but it does sometimes come at the expense of the treble here being a little bit sharper. Sometimes, like, this set doesn't sail through sibilant recordings as well as the Stellaris does. The Aria, on the other hand, again, this being a dynamic driver, technical performance, I would say, is pretty average, but really not bad. I think that the bass on this set is it's not the fastest or like the tightest hitting bass, but it is decently well isolated, and it gives a nice sense of depth to the sound, to the stereo image that both of these frankly kind of lack. So it does have that going for it, right? You get more impact with that bass, like kick drum body that's missing on both of these is actually pretty well done here on the Aria. I would say that, again, the attack on that bass lacks some definition and is a little bit on the woolly side, but I would say that, I don't know, it's more satisfying bass here on the Aria than you're going to get on these sets. So how would I rank these in terms of technical performance? Obviously, it's going to depend on what you prefer, but I got to be real. I would probably rank them like this, where the planars win, and I think that the Dioko does have a little bit of an edge over the Stellaris in terms of technical performance. So now, finally, we'll just talk about form factor, physical stuff, and a lot of this will be personal preference, but some of it will hopefully inform your decisions as well. The Moondrop Stellaris, I think it looks nice. I think it's a really handsome set. I love this cable. The long stems do make it for maybe somewhat of an odd fit, but it's actually not as bad as I expected. The bigger issue is that it actually kind of ends up causing more tangliness with the cable, which, I don't know, I can get over that. The Dioko, in contrast, let me punch in on this, fits surprisingly normal for me. If you look at this, it's actually kind of a large body, but I was surprised at how normal this fits me. I will say, with a caveat, that I've gotten feedback from other people that it doesn't fit them as normally as me, so just a fair warning that it is a relatively large body. So if you have small conchas, take that into consideration. The other thing notable, I think, about the Dioko is just this aesthetic. You're either gonna like this or really not like it. I kind of fall into the camp of not really liking it. I mean, it's like nicely made. It's an all metal shell, and I do think this is like a glass on the outside. It's not like a cheap plastic, so it doesn't feel cheap at all. I just don't like the look. I don't dig it. And then finally, the Moondrop Aria. The cable, this is actually a Moondrop SSR cable that's on this. I put it on here because the stock cable is actually kind of, I don't know, it's pretty messy. We'll just say that. But I do think that the Aria has a nice, simple look. This is a very familiar shell. Moondrops use this for a lot of their IMs. A very generic sort of dynamic driver fit, which is to say that it fits decently secure. Well, no, okay. It fits comfortably, it fits easily, but security is definitely not its strength. So yeah, but again, I do think that aesthetically it's quite nice. So if I were to rank these in terms of my preference, just on form factor stuff, I will be honest. I think the Stellaris is my favorite, and then probably followed up by the Aria, and then the Dioko would be unfortunately my least favorite, just because of that aesthetic. But again, make up your own mind on that. But I think that is going to do it for my thoughts here on, let me pull this thing out, my goodness, the Moondrop Stellaris. We talked about the build, we talked about the physical stuff, we talked about the sound, and then how it compares directly with some competitors. So I might as well score it. And out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give the Moondrop Stellaris 3 stars. I'm gonna keep dreaming for that planar IM that I want. I don't think this is quite it. I mean, it's a decent set. It's definitely weird. If you're looking for just like a home run, easy IM to buy that pretty much everyone's gonna like, unfortunately, that is not the Moondrop Stellaris. This is a set that might work pretty well with some music, and it's just not gonna work that well with a lot of stuff. I was listening to like Fleetwood Mac earlier today, and it just was not a great match for this set because it's pretty odd tonality and decent technical performance though. And I like the physical stuff, but I don't know. Frankly, this is not an IM I would super recommend, but it's also not super unpleasant. So those are my thoughts here on the Moondrop Stellaris. If you're interested in still checking it out, I do have it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this review helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ding the YouTube bell. YouTube will ostensibly let you know when I'm live, and then you can be here live in the live chat like the folks that are here live with me now. But otherwise, I'll catch you on the next super review. Have a good weekend, and if you're here live now, stick around.